What is up, guys? You got NotTheWorst here, bringing another Black Desert online video, and today we are revisiting the Awakening Dark Knight endgame PvE guide. She, along with many classes, received some pretty massive PvE buffs that were a big deal. Notably, she got cooldown reduction on a few of her skills, that being Spirit Legacy, as well as Seed to Catastrophe, both matching the original cooldown of Shattering Darkness at 7 seconds. So those all chain together very nicely. Dark Nebulas also alongside those. And then we did see a reduction for both Cluster of Despair and Trap of a Deer, coming down to 10 seconds, which along with the add-ons has done a whole lot for this kit in general. She also managed to dodge some nerfs they originally had planned on the global labs. Those were later revoked. So she did manage to escape that, making her an overall pretty strong choice in PvE. Her having some of the best skill effects in the game, in my opinion, alongside now making really nice money at some of the high-end spots, means it's a great option for people to pick up, especially in a lot of cases where some players used to feel like they had to play Succession even though they liked the more flashy style of Awakening. So if you are not familiar with my more recent PvE videos, I now have spreadsheets for these. I've included a link to that in the description below, so you can check that out. It has all of the information we're going to cover in the video today, and then since it's a spreadsheet, has the benefit of being able to be updated as changes are made or updates come, instead of having to look for new videos every single time, and can kind of just stick to doing those a few times a year when we have much larger changes or cooldowns and that sort of thing. So you might want to bookmark it as they'll continue adding info and make those prettier over time. And we're going to look through a few segments of that before we get into the skill rotation and that sort of thing. So with that said, let's first jump on into the crystals and take a look. All right, so first thing I want to point out, something you're going to notice on the spreadsheet is that there's not just one set. There's not a set that you run for crystals for DK or any class, really. You want to modify based on where you're grinding. Also, the note at the top there that your mileage may vary based on the hit rate that you have with the gear that you're using. Accuracy obviously matters based on what the evasion of certain mobs are wherever you're grinding. So different gear is going to have more accuracy on it. Higher grade accessories, higher grade weapons have more accuracy bonuses on them than lower grade, so you might need to adjust or add some accuracy depending on that spot if you notice you're missing on a lot of your key skills. That being said, we have a list here for several ones. We're going to be focusing on this video generic setup that you could kind of just use anywhere. This is going to be more towards the player that just doesn't want to care about accuracy. You just want to make sure you have enough and you're just kind of going through trying the class out rather than kind of setting everything up for a specific grind zone. We do have those options available if you want to set up for a specific grind zone, but that's kind of up to you. If you are running in a generic type setup, then this is going to be a decent guideline for you here. This is the we are on Succession. Succession is also included in this spreadsheet, heads up. So you'll notice that they're almost the same, except for a couple of differences at some of the spots. But anyways, this will be a great guideline for you. I guess that's a good tutorial. If you were clicking on it, you're like, hey, it's only showing me Succession stuff. Just scroll over like I just did. Their tutorial over. Tungrad Ruins setup is pretty close to what you could run in a generic set. Generic being something like Hex Sanctuary. We don't have mob species damage. Back attacks aren't super amazing there, that sort of thing. With this setup, though, you would run Corrupted Crystals in that slot. I just prefer the Mysterious Darkness for the back attacks at Tungrad Ruins specifically because of the Paralyzed mechanic for it. And then, as I mentioned, if you need more accuracy, you can always slot those in, just depending on your setup. As far as the other ones, it's pretty straightforward. It's PvE, we kind of get it. 2 Rebellious Spirit Crystal goes in probably every PvE set ever because they're just that good. Same thing with Glorious Awkrad, getting attack speed, extra accuracy, monster damage. Not a whole lot of explanation needed there. They're just an amazing crystal to have. We have 2 Jinn Vipers. Again, these can be dropped or picked up. If you notice the difference between Dark Seeker's setup and that setup there, they're almost identical, except for we drop a Jinn Viper to pick up an extra Valor. And actually, in my gear, I dropped this Viper too and just run another Power Crystal, but again, you'd need pretty high accuracy to pull that sort of thing off, so keep that in mind. Don't really need an explanation for Red Fang Valor Crystals, right? 5 AP, it gets us our max crit with our setup, so we're good there. Ultimate Macalod, same thing. It's just got everything we want in a PvE setup. And Crystal of Brutal Decimation, 7 monster AP, 1% back attack each, solid. And then, of course, Giron's Tear, just being the absolute best in slot for PvE. If you don't have some of these things, you can get some lower grade things. You could run something like Voltara Crystals, I suppose, in place of Rebellious Spirit Crystals. I'd really focus on getting those. Though the Ultimate Macalods can be a bit daunting, especially if you're just getting into it, if you don't already have a set or you're not coming from maybe endgame on another class. So you could run You could run regular Macalods for it. The reason that I'm not a huge fan of doing that is the AP difference is a bit lower. You don't get, these have 22 AP on the ultimates, and you could just run 4 power crystals, which is probably going to be cheaper than the 4 Macalods anyways while you're working on your ultimates. That's going to give you 20 AP. You won't get the stamina or the little bit of accuracy that the Macalod set gives you. So if those things are important to you based on your setup, then maybe consider the Macalods. But in general, I think 4 power crystals is totally fine for a budget option. They're sometimes pricey on the market, but without checking on your specific server off the top of my head, it shouldn't be too much different than running the 4 Macalods while you work on the ultimate set, being the end game scenario. The decimations should be pretty easy to pick up. And then, of course, the big one's going to be Gearin's Tier. You're somewhat time gated depending on your server. I think EU folks, if I'm not mistaken, you can actually buy the items to get a Gearin's Tier or combine into one. NA, it's not even close. You have to sit on pre-orders for a while and continue doing your boss shrines week over week. So if you don't have that, you could put a Gearin's Crystal in there. You could also run the Bong Water Tier in its place. That's a pretty fine crystal in almost every aspect. Kind of a good all-around option while you're working on your Gearin's Tier. Endgame being, you definitely want to run those. And then, as mentioned, you want to run the Corrupted magic crystals for your generic set. On that, you can also run Corrupteds both at Darkseekers and at Tungrad if you wanted to. Personally, on Awakening DK, I do prefer the back attack damage on them. On Succession, I still run the back. On Succession, I actually run Corrupted in both sets on there just because of how her AoE is dealt. So that's it for the crystals. Let's get into Lifestones and check out our sets. All right, so as you might imagine, we have several different options based on the spot that you're grinding. Same with our crystal setups, and you're going to note that across the board with both skill rotations and skill add-ons as well, because if you want to optimize it, you're not going to do exactly the same thing at every single grind zone. Grind zones also have unique types of mobs, different species types, so different Lightstones are going to be stronger in certain aspects. Speaking to the generic PvE setup like we have been throughout this video, if you just want to run something that's good all around and, just going to get the job done for the most part without trying to min-max, my over cap, I don't care about AP caps, I just want to play the game. Vicious Shadows is probably one of the best sets in the game for that all-around type playing, where you just want to put a thing on, do whatever you're doing, and not think too much about it. We get back attack damage added on there along with some critical hit damage, monster AP, and the thing is, it's only going to require 1 strike stone. I don't think it takes a stike stone. That's a different one that's not yet in the game. Strike stone in there, whereas the other option that you could go with is all-out attack. This one's a bit pricier. It takes 2 strike stones to pick that one up. It does have 24 AP, and note that that's regular AP, so this is going to have implications if you're on a PvP set as well. Critical hit damage plus 5%. It does lose 15 DR. The 25 evasion is pretty meaningless to a DK, but that 15 DR could matter, especially in a PvP setup, so I'd be real careful with that one. I do see this one pretty commonly run because it's super strong in PvE, and when you're on Arsha, it is decent there, but giving up DR is relevant, so just kind of keep that in mind. If we look at Tungrad Ruins, all-out attack is going to be your best option, assuming you can deal with the DR loss. I know that place hits pretty hard, so if you can manage it, definitely go with that. If not, the Wild's demi-human damage is going to be your next best option. You can pick up some Roar Stones without too much trouble. Giants, it's pretty indisputable. You should be running human damage on the spot. The entire place is built on just abusing that human damage ability to run as much as possible, elixirs of indignation and that sort of thing, to stack up as much human damage as possible, and our Lightstones are going to give us another 24, which is a really big impact to the performance there. Darkseekers is similar to Tungrad Ruins, except that the mobs don't hit quite as hard there, or at least if they do, it's because you goofed and they telegraph the crap out of the skills that you're doing, so you really shouldn't be taking damage. So it's a little easier to be safe with the all-out attack. Again, the 2 strike stones can be pretty daunting, so if you don't have that, again, the demi-human damage is totally fine there, since you have that. Gyphon Underground, same thing with the Wilds. Comma damage, it's going to be superior to Vicious Shadows here. I know a lot of people do like Vicious Shadows. If you actually try it, I don't recall what the calculations come out to if you use the Garmoth calc. It's like, I think it's 1% or a little under 1% in favor of Vicious Shadows. But if you actually try it, look at the number of skills when you're using the Wilds Kama Sylvia versus Vicious Shadows out there, and you'll find that you're actually clearing faster with the Wilds Kama Sylvia, thanks to how AP caps work there. So I would push you towards that one, but if you're just all around, again, Vicious Shadows is totally fine. Thornwood, same idea. You're gonna want the Wilds Kama Sylvia. If you're at this spot, you're at a point where you're min-maxing anyways. And COD is Crocodile's Tooth, which is kind of the similar setup to what Vicious Shadows does, but instead of back attack, it's down attack damage. That spot has a mechanic where you're going to get a CC from from a mob that CCs all the other mobs. They lay on the ground, and you can quite literally one-shot them if you build up correctly with your down attack damage, and your add-ons are built around it as well. So there's kind of your Lightstone sets. Again, generic, just kind of shoot for vicious shadows. The big change here is that in some spots, even Awakening DK did kind of want to just use Death Blow. That's gone the wayside with the changes to add-ons and some stronger options in general. And unlike Succession, Awakening was kind of flexing out of Death Blow in certain grind zones depending on the situation anyway, so not too surprising to see. Let's go ahead and jump into the add-ons, and then we'll get to the skill rotation and see how those tie in. All right, so same idea for our add-ons. We have several different options based on the spot that you're grinding. Again, we'll continue to expand this as new grind zones come out or other things are done more in depth. For today, we're going to be focusing on, as everything in this video, the generic setup for just kind of general PvE. Something to note about add-ons, it's really not the same ball game it was before. We had a change to how add-ons work so that the plus on them is the same amount of what we used to be familiar at tier 3 is. So they all have the same impact, meaning every skill you put a monster damage add-on on, it's going to be 30 monster damage. It doesn't matter what the skill is. The difference in tiering is now based on the amount of time that that buff works. So anything that's a tier 2, a monster add-on is going to be 12 seconds, and that's signified by a skill that is 12-second cooldown or 6 seconds to 12 seconds. If it's above that, it's a tier 3. If it's below that, it's a tier 1, and it's just the duration that is changed. So that being said, you kind of want to map out how you're doing your add-ons based on the buffs in your skill rotation that are used. What I mean by that, certain things are slightly more important than others. However, once you've done a single rotation, you're going to find that you have 100% uptime on these skills. And after about 4 skills, you kind of have a bit of overlap with your PvE skills anyways for the add-ons, thanks to the change to it. So you can't really mess up add-ons like you could before. There's just a little bit of min-maxing, and things that might matter are like evasion debuff at certain points if you need the AP, or excuse me, the accuracy for it based on where you're grinding. So not a whole lot to go through on these. It's fairly straightforward. You just want to focus on building it around your skill rotation. If you modify the skill rotation, you should modify your add-ons to reflect that, and vice versa. If you're modifying your add-ons, it should be based on how you're doing your skill rotation, because you want certain buffs to make sure that they're in order. And the only thing to look for is make sure you're not trying to overlap like a tier 1 with a tier 2. Tier 2 can't be overwritten by a tier 1, but a tier 1 can be overwritten by a tier 2, so it might mess up your refresh rates. The focus in general is typically to go with your self buffs, things like your monster AP, your attack speed, critical hit rate, those self buff effects first. Then next focus is going to be your debuffs on the mob, so like DP debuff, evasion debuff if you need it as well. And then last importance on that is typically going to be your damage modifiers. There's some exceptions based on where you're grinding, but lastly your damage modifiers, so your back attack, your critical hit damage, and if you're at a spot where it matters, down attack damage might be relevant for you too, mostly just City of the Dead. But if anybody's out there running an abandoned monastery these days, you know, that's just definitely an option for you alongside some human damage there too. So fairly straightforward with that. We've got Spirit Legacy with our with some monster AP and minus DP. Shattering's got our attack speed and a critical hit damage modifier on it. We've got a refresh on Grip of Grudge because this skill is fairly spammable with just our monster and critical hit rate. Since Grip of Grudge and Cluster of Despair are 2 skills that we want to make sure are getting max crit, and they're not kind of naturally, those are going to be the 2 you note that actually have the critical hit rate on it. Attack speed also going on top of Cluster of Despair. We have Twilight Dash, since it's got good AoE range, giving us our minus DP. It also is typically used for positioning, which is why we want to get the back attack damage modifier added on that. Dark Nebula having a really low accuracy rate on it, at the lowest out of the kit for usable skills at 3% as opposed to Twilight Dash is 5%. We give that one the accuracy buff that's on it. It typically needs it. You could move this to where it was somewhere more forward in your rotation if you needed it to. You're struggling for accuracy. Something else you could do is pick up the evasion debuff, maybe throw that on Twilight Dash or even Cluster of Despair, since those have really good AoE range. Shattering Darkness, any of those if you need the extra accuracy. Just something to think about there. So fairly straightforward just to get our buffs up. Let's jump into the skill rotation, kind of put it all together and show you how these add-ons are going to get applied. All right, so a few things I want to note with it. I've got options here with the skill icons for you. I have the PC inputs for the PC players and then the skill names as well, in case you're on console and want to pick this up. As far as skills that we actually are using out of our Rabam kit, there's 2, but we'll talk about all 3 that you're going to typically select here. Shadow Strike, which we will potentially use, which we'll see pretty quickly here. Unveiled Fate, which can be kind of used again, but sort of a gap fill if you want to, but not necessarily needed. And then we have Balance Strike, which we honestly just use for movement, since it's an extra air strike, right, that we get just to move around. That particular skill is not actually going to get used in this rotation for it, but something nice to have for movement, and also because slanted slash is kind of meh anyway, so there's no really need for it. You don't have to use Shadow Strike or Unveiled Dagger at all in this setup. In fact, the rotation we have, or excuse me, Unveiled Fate, the setup's not going to touch the Unveiled Fate, but it is an option in place of using like Wheel into Unveiled Dagger if you choose to. Personally don't like it, and I'll explain why as we start to get into the rotation. So the next thing to mention is, I know a lot of players like to try and just stay strictly in Awakening. There's a lot of classes that operate that way, and that's great, but if you actually want to maximize what you're doing in PvE, you do want to be using pre-awakened kit, and the reason for that is you don't have access to that attack speed buff from Unveiled Dagger or Unveiled Fate without touching the pre-awakening kit, and we don't want to leave that just sitting on the table because it is extremely important to maximizing your damage. That being said, we also want to think about maximizing damage while we go into pre-awaken. Something we don't want to do is just swap over to Unveiled Dagger and then go into Awakening Fright from there. Pretty inefficient. C-swap is silly. And we also have like a couple of pretty heavy hitting skills, or at least relevant skills in the pre-awakening kit. Most importantly, it's Blooming Black Rose. So you'll see we have two different options of how you want to engage. And the reason for the two options is because this is ranged or close up. So it kind of depends where you're grinding, or maybe you're first about to pull the pack, so you want to engage that way, and then you're going through the rotation a second time. You don't need the range, so maybe you want to use the Wheel setup. So you'll engage with Wheel if you're going to be close to the mobs, and Shadow Strike if you're far from the mobs. And then you're immediately going to press RMB, sorry, console players, I don't know what the input is, to engage your Blooming Black Rose quick cast. Both of these skills will quick cast it, but they have two different effects. If I Shadow Strike and RMB, you can see that it has a ranged effect. So again, this is really nice for our initial engage on the packs for doing that wherever they're set up. If I do it close off, or if I do it off of Wheel, we have a close range. So I'm dealing close range, hit that RMB, and boom, we have the same damage in the exact same AoE size as the Wheel of Fortune. So that's going to be our initial engage, but it also gives us swap into our pre-awaken kit, whether you hit that Shadow Strike or Wheel of Fortune. You want to hotkey that Wheel of Fortune, and personally I hotkey Shadow Strike because Shift X is just awkward for me, but that's just me, up to you. I hotkey each of those so that even if we're in our pre-awaken kit, it's going to our awaken kit will swap into that pre-awaken stance, and we can get our Blooming Black Rose off. And I'm telling you, BBR is really good damage. So yeah, it's a really nice swap. It's quick. The Wheel cooldown is short. The BBR cooldown is long, and it's actually the longest, one of the longest out of the rotation. But when we get into the pre-awaken kit, now we're going to be able to just use Unveiled Dagger, which gives us our attack speed buff. That's the whole reason we're even bothering with this setup. It's also cooldown management. And then once we've done that, we're going to get swapped back into our Awakening kit, so a quick Spirit Hunt to do that, and then we're going to go into Legacy. To note, you can just Legacy out of it, and Legacy also swaps you into Awakening, but typically coming off the Unveiled Dagger, it's usually a positioning thing for it, right? So if you go here, I can reposition with Spirit Hunt if I need to, whereas Legacy is not going to move me. So you get a little better positioning if you need it. You could skip it if you're in a good position or you don't want to change it, but it's a little extra chip damage nonetheless, so why not if you don't need it. After we Spirit Hunt, we're going to go straight into Spirit Legacy. We'll go straight into Cluster of Despair because we'll get the quick cast. That's one of the skills that'll quick cast it off of it. Because if you try to do Cluster by itself, you'll see it has kind of a wind-up animation. We want to make sure we minimize that wind-up. So we're getting just the quick cast. It wind-up looks like this, right? So obviously that's pretty slow, so we don't want to do that. Then we're just going to seed and go into its flow right away into Shattering Darkness and its two flows as well. You can use RMB on PC if you want to move backwards for that. In PvE, most of the time you're going forwards for it. We're immediately going to go to Dark Nebula. Do note that I do not use the quick cast Dark Nebula in this setup for this generic PvE kit. Reasoning for that is the timing and also, once again, positioning. This gives us really great repositioning. If we threw it directly after our Spirit Legacy, it does quick cast, but it does a little bit less damage. It's going to move us backwards, which for our generic setup is not what we're going to want to do. Then we have Grip of Grudge into Soul Snatch. Soul Snatch not necessary here, but it's the best to use it after Grip of Grudge because it gives it also a bit of a quick cast effect. It's not super slow coming off the back of those skills. Not incredibly amazing, but as you're seeing, this is the tail end of the rotation where we're kind of into the less desirable skills. Then to clean it up before you can rinse and repeat from the beginning, you have a few options here, and you might need to be a little bit heads up with what you're doing. This is where Unveiled Fate, if you want to, you potentially could throw it in. I personally don't. What I prefer to do at this point is I'm going to hotkey Flow Spirit Blaze and just use that from here. What you're going to find, though, is if your attack speed is pretty high if you're on an easy buff or whatever, or maybe you're just playing on a gajillion frames per second maybe. In those scenarios, you're probably not going to have all of the skills back up, and you might need to be a little creative. It's usually your Blooming Black Rose and possibly your cluster when you get back to it that's going to be in there. So from this point, you actually have some options you could do. You could do the entirety of Spirit Blaze if you want to. I'm not a huge fan of it, but it's fine there. And then also if you're at like a higher end grind zone, Darkseekers, Tongue-Grad Ruins or something, you can just use Touch of Exploitation. The new damage buffs on that where it make it, it's not like the most amazing skill, but it doesn't feel as pitiful as it has for years and years after the changes there. So that's totally an option. It's frontal guarded, which is nice, and you also recover really nice HP. That part of it also got buffed, so it's pretty good. You don't need all of them, so if you're going into Spirit Blaze, Flow Spirit Blaze, and Touch of Exploitation, I'll be honest, you're just kind of leaving DPS on the table going that route. It's more than you're going to need. Other than situationally, yeah, you could just go into higher damaging skills. So pick which ones you need from there. I would lean towards just the Flow by itself. And then second to that, I would actually do Touch of Exploitation. My last option would be a full-on Spirit Blaze setup from there. Something to keep in mind is you might need to reposition after one of those. Don't forget Trap of Vidir does exist for this. It does have an evasion debuff for mobs. We don't use it in the rotation anymore because we don't have to crutch it for our tier 3s thanks to the add-on changes. So you'll note it's not listed here, but just positioning wise, it is something to think about if you need to get back behind the mobs to maximize your damage. So that is it. You can rinse and repeat that rotation. I'll go through it a couple times just so you can see it. Reposition with that Nebula. We can throw a Spirit Hunt in there if needed, again, for positioning. Did mean to mention that, but yeah, all about positioning. And then you can just go right back. All our cooldowns are going to be back up for us. So we can just keep going on through it without having to worry about any of our cooldowns at all. So you can just rinse and repeat as much as you want. It's what the rotation was designed for. Obviously, if you want to move things around or add things, make sure you change the add-ons to match that, as we mentioned in the last section for it. I'm going to have a demo video of me actually showing this being used on mobs, so you can kind of get an idea what that looks like moving pack to pack and how to engage that. I'm actually going to be grinding at Hex in that setup. The reason that I chose Hex for that is it's a fairly neutral grind zone as far as this rotation goes. So when we talk about generic setups, that's about as generic a zone as it gets. It doesn't have a subspecies damage for, like, you know, crystal setups or lightstone setups that are specific to it. So just kind of a good place to kind of showcase, get kind of a baseline of where a class performs in PvE. So it's gonna be it for the video. If you did enjoy it, be sure to like it. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe so you get notifications when new videos go live. And if you'd like to catch me playing live, there is a link to my Twitch page in the description down below. Jump on over there, drop a follow so you get notifications for that as well. With that said, that's going to be it for this one. I want to thank everybody for watching, and I will see you next time.